There is a moment you did not witness with your eyes, but your soul has carried the memory of it every single day since. Not the version written on a hospital form, not the sterile clinical record of time and weight and room number, but the real version. The version that happened in the unseen. The moment where the atmosphere of heaven shifted like a held breath finally released, where something ancient and enormous trembled at the edges of what is visible, and where eternity leaned forward as if a story it had been waiting generations to tell was finally beginning. You felt it your whole life without having the words for it. That unnamed weight, that persistent, quiet sense that something about your existence was not ordinary, not broken, not cursed, just irreducibly, undeniably different, and that difference has cost you more than anyone around you has ever acknowledged. In friendships that never quite reached the depth you needed, in family rooms that felt like foreign countries, in the aching loneliness of standing in a crowd of people who share your blood and still feeling utterly, completely unseen. That feeling has a name. Most people will never give it to you because most people do not have the language for what you carry. But I do. What you have been living inside of, that constant low hum of spiritual displacement, that sense of not quite fitting the container the world built for you, is not a disorder. It is not a wound. It is spiritual memory, a residue, a fingerprint left on your soul from before you had a name, before you had a family, before the world had any opportunity to tell you who to be. Your soul remembers something your mind was never allowed to see, and it has been grieving the distance between what it knows is true and what the world insists is real. That grief is not weakness. That grief is proof. It is the evidence of a depth in you that the shallow waters around you were never equipped to hold. Because your birth, your actual birth, the one that mattered, was not simply a biological event. It was a divine interruption, a moment where eternity pressed itself deliberately, intentionally, and irreversibly into time and placed something irreplaceable inside human skin. Not a random soul assigned to a random body in a random family by a random universe. A specific calling, folded into flesh, placed with surgical precision inside a bloodline that needed exactly what you carry. Your first cry was not just the sound of a newborn entering the world. It was a declaration spoken into realms most people do not know exist. Forces both seen and unseen stopped what they were doing. One rejoiced, one trembled, one resisted. And all three of those reactions point to the exact same truth. What arrived that day was not merely a child. It was a correction, a disruption, an answer to a generational question that had gone unanswered for far too long. That is why in the trilogy, The Three Keys to a Prosperous Life, the link is in the pinned comment, I explain with everything I have that the very first thing you must understand about your journey is this: your origin was not accidental. The pain that followed your arrival was not punishment. It was the world reacting to something it did not know how to receive. If you have ever felt like your own family could not celebrate you the way you needed, if you have ever sat at a dinner table surrounded by people who share your last name and still felt like a stranger, I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to say will begin to make sense of everything. The rejection you felt from your own family, that strange distance, the subtle dismissal, the way your emotions were treated as too much and your questions treated as inconvenient, was not abandonment, not in the way your heart interpreted it. It was recognition, not the kind that feels warm and welcoming, not the kind that throws a celebration in your honor, but the kind that is purely and entirely spiritual. Your light did something to the people around you that they had no framework to process. It did not comfort them, it unsettled them. Your presence, simply by existing, exposed a darkness they had made peace with long before you were born. They had built an entire architecture of identity and survival around agreements that your arrival silently challenged. And rather than confront what your presence illuminated, they did what frightened people always do. They turned the discomfort outward. They handed it to you. You became the strange one, the oversensitive one, the one who felt too much, asked too much, wanted too much, the black sheep. And you believed them because you were young and because the people telling you were the ones you loved most. Walking into the house after a long and heavy day, you have felt it, that particular silence that is not peaceful but hollow. The kind of quiet that has texture, that presses against your chest the moment you cross the threshold. You have sat at those tables during the holidays, surrounded by laughter that somehow excluded you, performing the smile that was expected, chewing food that tasted like obligation, listening to conversations that floated entirely above the surface of anything real. You have felt the phantom weight of your own invisibility pressing down on your shoulders while the room moved around you as if you were furniture. And in the privacy of the shower, the water running loud enough to mask the sound, you have let yourself cry the cry you could not cry anywhere else. Not a cry of self-pity, deeper than that. A cry that comes from somewhere below the chest, from the part of you that remembers being chosen for something and cannot understand why the people closest to you treat you like a burden. Your body knew something your mind was still trying to deny. The tightness in your stomach at family gatherings was not anxiety without a cause. It was your nervous system faithfully reporting the truth your heart was still trying to protect. The epigenetics of your bloodline, the emotional inheritance carried not just in memory, but in the literal biology of your cells, in the way your cortisol responds to conflict, in the way your body learned to brace before a word was ever spoken. That is real. Science is just beginning to map what the spirit has always known, that what your grandparents survived, what your parents never healed, was passed down to you as a lived experience in your own flesh. You did not choose to inherit their fear. You did not consent to carry their unfinished grief, but you did. And the weight of it accumulated alongside your own pain, and the combination of the two made you feel like something was fundamentally wrong with you, when in reality, the weight you were carrying was never all yours. You were simply strong enough to feel it all. And that strength, the one that looked like sensitivity, the one they called weakness, was always, always the mark of something greater. Because here is what they could not see, and what the enemy hoped you would never discover. Your difference was never a defect, it was a design. The very qualities that made you hard to categorize, hard to contain, hard to reduce to the comfortable role the family system needed you to play, those were not flaws to be corrected. They were features. They were the specific contours of a calling that was too large to fit inside the box your environment tried to build around you. The way you felt things deeply was not emotional instability. It was spiritual antenna. The way you asked questions that made rooms uncomfortable was not arrogance or rebellion. It was the nature of a mind built to dismantle inherited lies. The way you refused, even in your most broken moments, to fully surrender to bitterness, that was not naivety. That was the grace of God, holding the most essential part of you intact, even when everything around you was doing its best to destroy it. And when you were most alone, when the rejection was freshest, and the loneliness was sharpest, and the silence of the house felt like a verdict, something was happening in that silence that you could not perceive, but that was more real than anything visible. God does not abandon his instruments. He does not draft a soul for a specific mission and then leave it defenseless in the dark. What felt like God's absence in those rooms was actually God's protection over something he had placed in you, that the environment around you was not safe to touch. The solitude that broke your heart was simultaneously the forge that made you. Every moment you were overlooked was a moment your roots were going deeper. Every season you were misunderstood was a season your discernment was becoming unbreakable. The pit was not the end. The pit was always the doorway. Joseph's brothers threw him into the ground and sat down to eat their meal. They looked at one another over their food and felt satisfied, the way people feel satisfied when they have finally silenced something that made them uncomfortable. They did not know they had just activated the exact sequence of events that would one day place Joseph on the highest seat in the land and put them in the position of needing what they had tried to destroy. Your family did not know either. The people who dismissed you, the ones who handed you the role of the difficult one, the broken one, the one who needed to be managed. They did not know they were participating in a divine arrangement far above their understanding. And David, sent to the fields, while his brothers stood before the prophet smelling of sheep and solitude, while they stood in the places of honor. That obscurity was not God forgetting him. That obscurity was God keeping him away from the politics of visibility until his character was ready for the weight of his calling. You have been in that field, and the prophet is already on his way. As I teach deeply in the material, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, I left the link for you in the pinned comment. This pain is not the whole of your story. It is the opening chapter. And the most important thing I need you to hear right now, standing at the exact point you are standing, is that what you are feeling is not the feeling of a soul that was abandoned. It is the feeling of a soul that is waking up. The criticism wrapped in concern. You are too sensitive. You take everything too personally. Why do you have to make everything so complicated? Was never truly about you. It was about the discomfort your clarity produced in people who had built their entire sense of safety on not being clear. Your sensitivity was a mirror they did not want to look into. Your depth was an indictment of their chosen shallowness, and so they handed you a diagnosis instead of an apology. They gave you a label instead of the acknowledgement you deserved. The hidden envy underneath those moments, the envy that was never named because naming it would require an honesty they were not capable of. That envy was a form of recognition. People do not work that hard to diminish something that does not threaten them. The intensity of the opposition you faced from the people who should have been your greatest supporters was, in its own painful and inverted way, a confirmation of your worth. Your sensitivity was always the most spiritually significant thing about you. Not a liability to manage, a gift to deploy. The same nervous system that made you feel everything, the tension in a room before a word was spoken, the grief beneath someone's casual smile, the spiritual atmosphere of a place the moment you walked in. That same nervous system is what makes you capable of the level of empathy, discernment, and healing that you were sent to carry. The light in you did not cause their darkness. Their darkness was already there. Your light simply made it impossible to ignore. And that is exactly why light has always been opposed. Not because it is weak, because it is unbearable to what prefers the dark. Think of the way Jesus moved through crowds that contained people who wanted to destroy him. Think of the absolute inability of his presence to go unnoticed. He did not announce himself loudly. He did not have to. His presence rearranged the atmosphere of every room he entered, and people had one of 2 reactions. They drew near because something in them recognized truth, or they recoiled because something in them recognized the exposure. You have lived this dynamic in smaller but no less spiritually significant ways. The rooms that became tense when you entered them were not tense because you were a problem. They were tense because your arrival activated something in the invisible realm. The people who went out of their way to undermine you were not doing so out of pure malice. They were doing so because something in them, something they would never acknowledge, something they might not have even consciously known was there, recognized that you carried a light that made their chosen darkness less comfortable. And here is what the enemy counted on. The strategy that has worked against so many before you, that the accumulation of those moments, the dismissals, The criticisms, the loneliness, the invisible dinners, the birthdays that felt like obligations, the achievements that were minimized, the wounds that were handed back to you as character defects. That all of that would eventually convince you that you were the problem. That if so many people in your most intimate circle treated you as too much or not enough, then maybe they were right. Maybe the issue was you. Maybe what you carried was not a gift, but a burden. Maybe the loneliness was not the cost of being set apart, but simply the natural consequence of being someone who was fundamentally hard to love. That lie is the most dangerous one the enemy ever planted inside of you. And I am here to tell you, with everything I have, that it was always a lie. You were not the problem, you were the answer. And the people who could not receive you were not equipped to hold what you carry. That is not their condemnation, and it is not your failure. It is simply the spiritual reality of what it means to be placed in a lineage as a disruptor rather than a continuation. Not every vessel is built for every substance. You were not poured into the wrong container by accident. You were placed there with purpose. To crack what needed cracking, to expose what needed exposing, to carry the weight of transformation that no one before you had been willing to pick up. And when the container eventually proved too small, too hostile, too misaligned with what you carried, God began the process of removing you from it, not as rejection, as promotion. The people who left, the relationships that dissolved, the doors that closed, the ones that devastated you in the moment, the ones you grieved longer than you have ever admitted, the ones you still touch in your memory like a wound that never fully healed. Those removals were the mercy of God in action. The hand that felt like it was taking from you was actually the hand that was protecting you. Because what remained in those relationships, had they continued, was not love. It was slow erosion. It was the quiet, continuous draining of the very thing that made you who you are, one compromise at a time, one silencing at a time, one moment of making yourself smaller so that someone else could feel more comfortable. God did not remove those people because he was punishing you. He removed them because he could see what they were doing to the instrument he had spent generations preparing. There is a specific spiritual danger that comes after God removes something painful from your life. And it is the danger that very few people talk about because it feels so counterintuitive. It is the temptation to look back. Lot's wife did not turn back because she was wicked. She turned back because she was human. Because even fire, if it is familiar enough, can feel like home. Because even the things that were destroying you can become the landmarks by which you orient yourself. And when God moves you away from them, you experience something that feels more like loss than liberation. And in that feeling, you turn. And the turning is the tragedy. Not because God is punitive, but because what you were looking back at was already gone, already burning. And the act of turning back toward it transformed her from a woman walking toward her future into a monument to a past that was never worth preserving. You have stood at that crossroads. You have felt the pull to return to the familiar pain because at least the familiar pain was known. At least in the house that never fully accepted you, you knew the layout. You knew what to expect. The wilderness of stepping fully into your calling has no map you can borrow. It requires you to trust the guide you cannot always see. And the only way to walk that road is to refuse, absolutely refuse, to turn back toward the fire. The false approvals you spent years chasing, the validation from the parent who withheld it, the acceptance from the sibling who resented you, the belonging in the family system that was built on terms you could never authentically meet. Those were not real nourishment. They were a substitute. They were the thing you reached for because what you actually needed was not available in that environment, and a soul in pain will reach for whatever is closest. But you have tasted enough of that substitute by now to know that it never actually fed you. Every time you got a crumb of the approval you were starving for, it lasted only long enough to make you hungrier. That cycle, the performing, the shrinking, the hoping, the disappointment, the trying again, that cycle was not love. It was a trap. And every time you feel the pull to re-enter it, what you are feeling is not love drawing you back. It is familiarity. It is the gravitational field of an old wound, and you are no longer required to orbit it. The chains you are breaking are not only yours. This is the part that will settle something deep in your bones if you let it. The systemic patterns you are dismantling, the cycles of abandonment, of emotional unavailability, of spiritual compromise passed down through your family line like a dark inheritance. Those did not begin with you, and they were not meant to end with you continuing them. You were placed in that lineage specifically because you were capable of doing what no one before you had the strength or the revelation to do. Stop it. Not through anger, not through cutting off and walking away in bitterness, through healing, through the kind of radical self-recovery that also retroactively heals what came before and preemptively protects what will come after. When you heal, you are not just healing yourself. You are healing the version of your grandmother who never had someone come alongside her the way you are being walked through this now. You are protecting the children who will carry your name one day from inheriting what you are refusing to pass down. The work you are doing in the hidden place, the work of choosing truth over familiarity, of choosing growth over comfort, of choosing God's voice over the voices that told you who you were not. That work is generational. And the solitude that used to feel like exile is beginning to feel, even if only in brief and quiet moments, like something else. Like a room that has been cleared. Like a life that has been swept clean and is waiting with an almost unbearable openness for what is meant to fill it. The loneliness that broke you was not your permanent condition. It was a transition. The space that was created when the relationships that were not aligned with your purpose were removed, that space was not emptiness. That space was preparation. Every room must be emptied before it can be filled with something better. Every field must lie fallow before it can receive a new planting. The solitude you are in right now, the one that sometimes feels like the whole world has forgotten you exist, is not God's verdict on your worth. It is God's workshop for your next chapter. The new tribe is coming. The people who will see you without you having to perform, who will celebrate what previous environments tried to diminish, who will recognize the language you speak because they speak it too. They exist. They are already in motion. They are already on the roads that are converging with yours. They are the ones who have also walked through fire and come out the other side, not unburned, but refined. They are the ones who will not be threatened by your depth, but drawn to it, who will not require you to make yourself smaller, but will actually make more space for you to be larger. They are the sacred connections that cannot be rushed or forced or manufactured, but they are real and they are near, and the preparation you have been undergoing in this season of solitude has been making you ready to recognize them and receive them when they arrive. You are not waiting anymore. The season of passive waiting is over. What is required of you now is motion. The forward motion of someone who has finally accepted the full truth of what they carry and has decided at last to carry it without apology. The heaviness you feel is not the weight of a condemned soul. It is the weight of a mantle. The dreams that feel more like assignments than rest are exactly that, assignments. The emotional surges without clear external cause are the overflow of a spirit that is activating, that is remembering, that is stepping into dimensions of its own purpose that it has never fully inhabited before. You are not falling apart. You are coming together. The scroll over your life is unsealing, and what is written on it has been waiting for this exact moment in your exact history to be read. Walk forward, not with the false confidence of someone who has no questions, but with the real confidence of someone who has met the one who holds the answers. Walk forward past the dinner tables that never made room for you. Walk forward past the voices that told you the difference you carried was a defect. Walk forward past the gravitational pull of the old fire, the old approvals, the old version of yourself who needed to shrink to survive. Walk forward into the fullness of what it means to have been sent, not born by accident into a random story, but placed with divine intention into the exact coordinates of history that required exactly what you carry. The heavens have been watching this story since before your name was spoken aloud. They watched the morning of your arrival. They have watched every moment since. And they are watching now as you begin, perhaps for the very first time, to walk in the direction you were always meant to go. The healing is not a destination you are still trying to reach. It has already begun inside of you. It began the moment you stopped believing that the rejection was evidence of your worthlessness and started allowing the possibility that it was evidence of your appointment. It advanced every time you chose, in the privacy of your own soul, to be honest rather than comfortable. It deepened every time you survived a season that was designed to destroy you and came out the other side still breathing, still reaching, still refusing to give up on the version of yourself that God has always seen. That version, the one heaven has always known, the one your soul remembers from before you had a name. That is the one who is emerging now, not the wounded version shaped by everything that was done to you, the original, the sent one, the one who arrived in the middle of a generational storm, not to be swept away by it, but to end it. The family chains you were born into did not define your destination. They defined your assignment. The pain that was handed to you across generations was not your inheritance to keep. It was your inheritance to break, and the breaking of it, the actual, lived, costly, beautiful work of refusing to pass down what was passed to you, is the most sacred act a human being can perform inside the span of a single lifetime. It is an act of intercession for the past and protection for the future. It is an act of love for people who could not love you well, performed not from a place of debt but from a place of freedom. You owe them nothing, but you are capable of something extraordinary, and doing it not because they deserve it, but because you have been made into someone for whom extraordinary is no longer optional. The storm you were built for has arrived. The lighthouse does not apologize for its light when the ships are in danger. It does not dim itself to avoid being visible. It does not negotiate with the darkness about how much of itself it is allowed to show. It stands, it burns, it sends its signal out into the black water without knowing which ships will find their way home because of it, trusting only that the light is real and that real light always finds the eyes that need it most. You are that lighthouse. You were built for exactly this moment, in exactly this storm, and the same heaven that leaned forward on the morning of your arrival has never once looked away. You were sent, you are covered, you are not behind, you are not broken, you are not too late, and the world that needs what you carry cannot wait any longer for you to believe it. If everything in this message resonated somewhere below your chest, somewhere in the part of you that has been waiting for someone to finally say this out loud, do not let that resonance fade without taking one step forward. In the trilogy, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, which link is in the pinned comment, you will find the practical and spiritual framework that transforms this awakening from a feeling into a foundation. Because a chosen soul without tools is still a soul in pain. And you have done enough of your growing through pain alone. It is time to grow through truth, through strategy, through the deliberate application of principles that align your daily life with the calling that was placed in you before you drew your first breath. The link is waiting for you. The tribe is forming around it. And the next chapter of your story, the one where the sent one finally walks in the fullness of what they were sent to do, begins the moment you decide that the evidence of your purpose is no longer something you need anyone else's permission to believe.